right. A very good afternoon and greetings from the Western City of Mbarara. My name is Lynn Komjisha. Today, I welcome you to our Uganda Diaspora Show, and very lovely having our very first, for the very first time, Ambassador Namboka. It's lovely having you, and thank you for making time. Francis
Thank you.
Kamuhada, I see you. Thank you for joining. Kharim and Ntambi, thank you. Allow us first hear a little bit about the ambassador. Maybe he can tell us about himself, what he has been about, what he has been up to, and then we can dive in today's conversation. One thing I know is that he's a retired diplomat and an author of the Dreaming of a New Uganda. Yes, Ambassador, could you tell us a little bit more and then we can dive into a conversation?
Thanks very much indeed, Lynn. I'll try and be brief because it's a long story, but I'm someone who was born in the 40s, last century. I went to King's College, Budo, among other schools. I'm a Makererian, and I did my postgraduate studies in Europe, in France. And I worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and later on with the United Nations. I retired and I now work with civil society organizations, especially in the field of awareness building, Pan-African thinking as one people, even if there were two countries, there are countries that were created. So I wrote about Dreaming of a New Uganda after having written about Dreaming of a New Africa. And I'm very keen to think as a parent and as a grandparent of the generations that will be living on the continent and in the world after us. And this is why when I saw the work, the Center for Constitutional Affairs or Center for Constitutional what?
Governance.
Governance, yes, there is governance in there. And I felt this is a constructive kind of work one should devote energy to. And so here I am. That is a bit of my background. Thanks very much.
Most welcome to CCG's Civic Space TV. So today, a number of issues are happening. Maybe I'll take a minute for each one of you to give us a few highlights of what's happening and what they think is making headlines, maybe a minute per person. And then we look at all this. First of all, in Uganda, Uganda's election season, politics of crowds are taking center stage. The number of people who turn up at campaign rallies is becoming more than just a show of excitement. It looks more like a political statement, but we've been here before and we know what that means and we know how eventually it plays out. Today, the president is campaigning in Busoga, but the biggest question that comes to mind is, can President Museveni mend fences in Busoga after Kadaga's defeat as he takes his Protecting the Gains campaign to her home area? We also take a look at Kenya-Uganda Indian Ocean access discussions. You saw that. We shall also maybe dive a little bit into the release of Kenyan activists and human rights activists Bob Njangi and Nicholas Oyo. And then importantly, dive into the Indian Ocean conversation. But all these somehow take us back to Ambassador's book and how it plays into all this, or how, because its themes are about transparency, about institutional transparency. We're looking at accountability. So we shall dive into all those. But I want to take a minute for each one of you, maybe, to give me what this thing is making headlines. Francis, I'll start with you. Let's keep it brief, but let's hint on what is making headlines for you. Francis.
Thank you, Lynn, and other fellow panelists. And on my side, what is making headlines was the rhetoric of of the president of Uganda, which I believe, in my own opinion, was uncalled for. Then the second one here in DC, of course, you must have heard of the Epstein files that involves a series of sex scandals in the past, like sex trafficking. So again, it has caught up a little bit of fire, and it is bringing a lot of turns and twists. But also at the same time, we are glad that the long government shutdown in US history was resolved, and now again business is flowing. Otherwise, it was a big threat to both the citizens and people who are working for government. But anyway, everything here revolves around what government can do and what government cannot do. Thank you.
Yes, good morning again. Thank you, Lynn. I think Kamuhada summarized everything very well. Here in DC, the talk of town has been the reopening of the government. It's been 41 days, maybe the longest one, until the two parties got to the agreement to have the federal workers back to work. Also, what has been making news, as Francis said, is some of the emails of Epstein are being released right now, and that's what's making news actually here in DC. Plus, the hosting of the former Al Qaeda member here in Washington DC to people who have been anti-terrorists, to have one of them sit next to the president, that has been making news. And also, we have a new mayor elect in New York, one of our own, son of
Yes.
Professor Mamdani and filmmaker Mira.
Yeah.
So he's also
Mhm.
making news. There is nowhere you scroll and you don't find him. I think he's going to give one side of American news for the next 5 years. So we shall be watching closely and following with deep concern. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right. So let's dive into it. Ambassador, maybe I don't know what's making headlines your end. You could also share with us.
Well, living like you might imagine in Europe, as opposed, I think, to my friends who are across the Atlantic Ocean, here in Europe, there isn't very much, except that, of course, there is news and current news of the former president of France, Mr. Nicolas Sarkozy, who, after leaving office, was found guilty for mismanagement and some resource misappropriation, and is going to appeal against this. But he's the first president ever in France that has had to be imprisoned for things that did not go correctly in view of the institutions, the justice system, and the law. I think basically in the context of what we are thinking about as one world and examples, good and bad examples, the fact that a country's president can be held to account for what he did, and if found guilty, is sentenced to prison, is a big message for those of us who are new countries. As individuals, we live in this country and we're grateful, but we have to live by the rule of law. And I think for me, that's enough in the way of what's happening here on this continent. Thanks very much.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let's quickly dive into today's conversation. I want to quickly start with, because I would want us to largely focus on what has raised more eyebrows around, and that will be later. But now, two Kenyan human rights activists, Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo, who were abducted in Kampala, have been released and returned to Kenya. They'd been held in Communicado for 38 days, reportedly in a Ugandan military facility after attending a political rally for Ugandan opposition leader Bobby Wine. The release on November 7th, 20 this year, of course, that is a bit earlier, followed intense diplomatic pressure from the Kenyan government, human rights organizations, and international outcry. It has also put a spotlight on cross-border repression and the state of human rights within the East African community. I think we have hinted on this earlier on one of the conversations here, where we saw Ugandan activists cross over to Tanzania and they were arrested. We saw what happened when Dr. Chiza Besigye was arrested across in Kenya, and now from Kenya to Uganda they're arrested, but of course eventually released. What does this mean for Uganda, but also the region at large? I mean, is political association, are we seeing a change or I'm looking for the word. Are we seeing a shift in how we support each other regionally, in terms of politics? And is this becoming a region of risk? I'll start with you, Ambassador. From your point of view, what do you make of this?
I'll be very brief. First of all, I'm a student of public international law, and we are familiar with words like community. When you speak about the European community or the European Union, or for example, the CARICOM, those countries that see themselves as a family of nations, I think that the East African community is in the same vein a kind of community, not just of heads of state and politicians. A community really means the oneness of people. When Tanzanians are not happy, Ugandans get concerned. Of course, to remove Idi Amin, Julius Nyerere came in as a helper for Ugandans to get back to what you'd call liberty and freedom and the enjoyment of basic rights. And that is the gesture communities appreciate when the leadership is doing things that are in the interest of citizens. Now, when you cite the arrest or the abduction of citizens from a neighboring country, it raises questions, because countries that are neighbors normally provide alternatives when there is a problem domestically, just like in the African setting of things. A neighbor, when your neighbor sort of batters his wife, or when the wife of your neighbor is becoming unruly, the neighbor comes in to try and help and can provide asylum, refuge, and help reconcile people. Now, in the case of our three countries, the original nucleus of the East African community, it gets worrying, both socially as a people who used to be, when Uganda is bad, people would go to Kenya and survive and wait until things are improved. People from Uganda would go to Tanzania when things are difficult until they come back. But that is when leadership allows someone in trouble coming in and not being in danger. What is happening now gets worrying, because you can no longer hope that if you have difficulties and you're in Tanzania, you can go to Uganda without doing any harm to your country. But, you know, be there in safety and without concern. We had many, many people, teachers, medicine, doctors in Kenya during the hard times when we ourselves had difficulties. But the developments in our community now are sort of troubling, because when you hear about abduction, Dr. Chiza Besigye was abducted. Now, just mentioned the two, well, call them activists, but basically just sympathizers of a kind of position, point of view in Uganda or in Tanzania. If this can no longer be possible, then anyone who knows our own countries and the old historical mutual help we gave each other, we think we need to speak to our leaders and make them appreciate that communities aren't just for them. They are for their people. That a leader in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, will not just enjoy that high-level cloud satisfaction at the cost of his people. I think that would be my take on what has happened across our very, very special brotherhood. We studied with Tanzanians in the class during our days, the 70s. And our people were in Nairobi, and our people were in Dar es Salaam, and vice versa. I'd like us to feel that this is still possible, whatever view you may hold about Idi Amin when you were studying in Kenya. They will let you study peacefully. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. I see Dr. Kisambira has finally joined us. Doctor, you found us when we just started. You will, when I come to you, you will let us know what you think has made headlines. But as we continue the show, Francis, I come to you, and still on the same issue. I ask because we have seen in the recent past that there's been some sort of discontent, but also some increased solidarity. You saw what happened in Tanzania when it was after the elections, during and after the elections, and how we're seeing Malawians trying to cross into Tanzania, Kenyans trying to cross into Tanzania in solidarity. But now with what happened to this gentleman from Kenya, what happened to Dr. Chiza Besigye, if you remember Agatha Ture and others that have been held in different countries, could instance in these like these, we can first of all, we are here preaching the East African Federation. That is one. Two, does it now weaken our seemingly growing interest in the East African Federation? And does it also show that there's increased transnational solidarity already hinted on by the ambassador? Is it? Are we going to see? If you remember, he has hinted on the things that happened with Mwalimu Nyerere, of course, supporting then young Uganda. That solidarity, is it growing? Is the solidarity coming back to life? Are you seeing this play out in the next, general elections come 2026? I know that's a bit broad, but I'm trying to hit on key point areas for that. Francis.
Thank you, Lynn, and as Ambassador clearly put it, I'll take us back to the four major pillars of the East African community. We say it is anchored on customs union, common market, monetary union, and then political federation.
Yes.
Now, all these come with more of bilateral agreements, but because we have accepted that we are operating as the East African community, that is one family, whether you like it or not, the dictatorial tendencies will not hold for long, because if we don't put structures very fast, like of course in Uganda you see there is collapse of structures of government. That's what is partly causing that there would be channels of diplomacy, but they are not there. So this is a different generation. So information that used to be private to only a few now will spread very fast. That we are able to know what is taking place in Kenya or what is taking place in Tanzania and any other country, and also big banking on other examples in other countries, what is happening and how people are emancipating themselves. So to me, the arrest of the two gentlemen who came to Uganda in solidarity with the opposition, I think it was uncalled for. If our president himself has been preaching that we need to be looking at political federation, because that is step number one, that people can freely come from Kenya or whatever, come to Uganda or express their political views in as far as how Uganda is governed vis-a-vis part of the East African community. I don't think that was called for. Ambassador hinted on going to Kenya and you abduct a prominent figure in a country, a leader, you just grab them like as you are grabbing chicken, is uncalled for, because there are protocols that we need to follow. If in any case I have a case to answer, whether in Uganda or in Kenya, so we have to follow these channels, and that is what would be showing that we are politically growing mature as a country, than trying to create kings and monarchies and so on. But having said that, I would say that the momentum that the young generation or East Africans are pursuing will not be stopped. And whoever will not handle it with care will generally cause something that is catastrophic in the whole of East African region. Because now this should be where the dictators in East Africa should think twice. It should be an eye-opener. If the leaders have not put into practice the East African community or the federation, the younger generation are ready to put it into practice by all means. But to me, the only part that I see and I don't agree with is where now the young generation are putting it into practice in a wrong way. For example, I will give an example when we had issues between Kenya and Uganda, and then the youth in Kenya just ran to one of our buildings and then burnt it down. So I don't agree with that. Yeah, because the anger should not be towards destruction of property, but instead should be towards the people who are our targets. We should have our prime targets. Who are those? If they are the leaders, then let's not destroy the infrastructure that we are supposed to inherit to bring in systems that work, that we believe in. But lastly, I would say, and Ambassador should agree, I think Ambassador will throw more light on this. I think in East Africa and Uganda in particular, gone are the days when we had real diplomats. I think the veterans like Ambassador Namboka, they need to go and mentor, because completely there is no diplomacy. We don't have diplomats. That's why you find that when we had a consulate in, I think in Arab Emirates, you find the people called the diplomats had turned it into a casino. So I think that is also lacking, and then that would usher in how do we handle such issues that are of international concern amongst sister countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for that. Dr. Kisambira and Kharim, allow me end with you for political reasons. Dr. Kisambira, I want you to come in here. Do you think that the release, the latest abduction, but also the release of this gentleman from Kenya, is it a sign that political activism in one East African country is now viewed as a regional threat? Like, does it become a regional threat? And should it be? Should we now sit as ESC and have a conversation about human rights obligations between member states? Because I want to think they were laid down before, Doctor.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn, and hi to all the panelists. It's an evening here in Uganda, so good evening, everyone. Well, the issue of abduction of activists in Uganda here, it's not. I don't think it makes so much headlines for that sake, because it's been a norm ways back that even our local activists in the different aspects, whether it is social justice, whether it is provision of social services, whether it is political, I think they have all faced some sort of detention. Those who have been demanding rule of law in all sorts of manner in Uganda, it's not really news, and it does not make headlines. Where it is most important for this particular case is that it pulled diplomatic shoulders to rub one another in one way or the other, but especially on political grounds, because Uganda is a country that subscribes to the East African community, for which they have shared values, and they have some objectives in common as to why they had agreed to form such a regional bloc. And one of the reasons must have been political and also social interaction. So when it so happens that there is a political problem in Kenya, for which the people currently that people refer to as the Gen Z feel it as a shared problem in the whole of East Africa. That's why you'd see that when there is an uprising in one country, it calls for crossover of group of the same age into another country in sort of kind of solidarity and support. So when the Kenyans crossed here, I think about 40 days ago, because they were detained for close to a month or 30 something days. So when they crossed here, they had come to join a rally of one of the presidential candidates, whom I think, in my own view currently, represents a certain age group of people who make the biggest percentage of our population, and which is no difference from Kenya's case, because I think their young population is greater than the elder population. So they felt they should come to stand in solidarity. For whatever reasons, I am not so much concerned, but the president had alluded to the fact that they had come to support and train rioters in Uganda. But it raised it caused diplomatic uproar in several corners, to the extent that it portrayed to the world how our judiciary is actually in trial, how the rule of law in Uganda is on trial, how the diplomatic ties between Kenya and Uganda are on trial. And this was much portrayed in such a way that when the people locally here demanded for the release of the detained activists, all sorts of responsible personnel in the government and the state denied they denied that they don't know where the whereabouts of these people. And to the end of the tunnel, you see the Fountain of Honor claiming responsibility of their detention and where they've been. So here it shows you that justice in Uganda is not really for everyone until it is subjected to discretion of one particular individual who is not subject to the law. Secondly, it shows you that the institutions and institutional framework in Uganda do not operate the way they are supposed to operate, because the detention site, as the Kenyans describe, as the victims describe, is off-grid. It's not among the known gazetted detention centers that we should have criminals detained in Uganda. And thirdly, there is no record of judicial trial that was set forth. So that clearly shaded a picture of how our judiciary is in trial. And then when it comes to the diplomatic ties, yes, for me, there I have a win-win situation whereby, yes, we had so many calls from the Kenyans calling for the release, to the extent that some of them, I think, had some sort of industrial actions demanding for the same. But at the end of the day, it yielded some results when we had diplomatic engagements, where at some extent claiming that it got involved in the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, on diplomatic terms, whether it was formal or informal, but at least it yielded results that these people were released unharmed, even when there are claims of torture. So I would say that as a region, we have a problem so far. It's not only in Uganda. We all know what happened in Tanzania recently. We know what happened in Kenya just a few months back. We know what is happening in Uganda for years. We know what is happening in South Sudan right now. Democracy in Rwanda is also in question, and several other areas that form part of the East Africa, like the DRC. So it's not only a local problem, and it's not bilateral between Kenya and Uganda. This is something that has shaded a bigger picture to the whole of the East African community. Trust me today, when you have an issue in Rwanda that is similar to what happened here, or somewhere in Tanzania or in Kenya, you'll find that the Gen Zs are willing to come together to solve their problem, which is in one word or some sort of statement to describe it: bad governance. Lastly, I heard of a movement coming up known as the East African Foot Soldiers, something of the sort. So, I mean, this is not something that should be coming by surprise to whoever is concerned. These people are going through the same harsh conditions, and to the advantage of globalization and to the advantage of technology and the era of ICT, it has created a world of a borderless world, a borderless community. We have an East African community which has borders, yes, in physical, but we have a community which is united without borders. So it's not going to be uncommon in future to see people crossing over into matters of different geographical jurisdictions with claims of being part and parcel of that particular problem, and willingly people sacrifice lives and resources in trying to contribute to such revolutions or trying to solve such particular problems. So as Uganda, in brief, we should handle such matters with care, because of recent we've not had very good I don't think we're at our best of terms with Kenya. So when it comes to matters involving international citizens, I think we should handle them with care, because we do not have the best image out there.
Thank you, Dr. Kisambira. Kharim and Ntambi, I mentioned that I'm concluding this topic particularly with you for political reasons, because you are from the National Unity Platform, and these gentlemen had come to support, of course, the National Unity Platform. Now, the question to you, Kharim, is that one, it is a bit obvious, though, but from your point of view, is political association with Uganda's opposition? Let's keep it within that space. Is political association with Uganda's opposition becoming a regional risk, taking into account all that has happened previously? Remember the National Unity Platform people who actually went to Kenya and released a statement there, which they could have done here. Then, and what then does this say about political competition? We're heading into 2026. Where do we stand? Where does the opposition stand with all this?
Thank you so much, Lynn. I think there are maybe a couple of things that I would have to hint. Like when you have a government for 40 years in a region, that creates some kind of a strong man syndrome within the region. And observing what has been happening since last year, since Kizza Besigye was abducted in Kenya, also looking at things like, the arrest of Agatha Twaire in Tanzania, and now the recent abductions of of Nicholas Oyo and Bob Nyagi in Kenya, it all tells you that the region is willing to forego human rights, especially when it comes to freedoms of association and freedom of expression. Those things are eroding. And we might look at the East African community as a region that is growing economically, but if we don't look at the interpersonal connections, how people relate, and people are easily abducted from one country into the other, it becomes a risk, because we can never tell when all this thing is going to blow up. So one thing that gives me hope is that young people in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania know that all this confusion has nothing to do with them as a people. They know that, it is a top-bottom problem. It is a problem with our leaders. It's a problem with the leaders in Tanzania that abducted Agatha Taire. It has been a problem with Museveni, who abducted Nicholas Oyo and Bob Nyagi, and proudly bragged that he kept them in a fridge for a little bit. And it has also been a problem of our friends on the border in Kenya, who really didn't pursue the way Dr. Kizza Besigye had been abducted by Ugandan forces, and they did not hold the people in power accountable. So whereas the leaders might feel like they are strong, by the way, they should know that they are weak, because it's going to take one of these strange things that they are doing to have the region rise up at some point, and this will happen soon. We don't know what will bring it, but the leaders should know that the problem is not as of the East African people. It's a question of leadership. And if young people in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda are questioning their leadership, one of those days they are going to rise up. They are going to rise up, and these little gains that we think have been, achieved with the East African community can totally take a different turn, and then maybe we would have to rebuild the community once again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Kharim. And that I want us to conclude on that particular topic, but it's related to the next one. We saw that President Museveni, speaking during a radio interview recently, he said that blocking landlocked countries from access to the sea was madness, insisting that Uganda was entitled to the Indian Ocean due to its economic and security needs. And so to Kenyans, this came off as a veiled threat seen as targeting Kenya. And of course, has warned of future wars in the East African community to secure access. But this is not the first time we have had these remarks. Museveni has previously raised similar arguments in the context of regional trade and logistics, advocating for greater access for landlocked states to seaports in neighboring countries, Kenya and Tanzania. But the latest remarks have sort of reignited old debates on sovereignty, geography, and the limits of regional integration. Another interesting thing that came up is that it's seemingly Ugandans were not prepared for something like this. During the campaign season, the president comes forward and this is what he's talking about. But now this brings me to you, Ambassador. When you look at this new development, is Uganda overstepping? Is it overextending itself regionally? And what could it be looking for? What does this say of Uganda? First of all, we see that Uganda has its tentacles almost spread across the East African community. In South Sudan, it deployed. In DRC, it deployed. In Tanzania, I don't. There were rumors, not confirmed. In Kenya, we have been seeing the back and forth. In Rwanda, we have been there. We have seen the back and forth too. So, should we be worried at this point, Ambassador?
Thank you very much indeed, Lynn. The bit of discussion you've just started cannot be pursued before we go back to what Francis hinted on, that we've lost the role, the very critical role of professional diplomats. He pointed out that aspect. And I think we need to understand the meaning of that thing. You see, we are modern creations by the Western world. African countries are hardly 100 years old. Most of us are about, at the very most, 100. But the modern states, living in juxtaposition, sometimes totally landlocked. And it's not our choice. It's because people in Berlin decided to chop up Africa into what they call today's states. But if, by sheer accident, a country like ours finds itself without direct access to the ports on the big oceans, for me, and I touched on this in my book, the first book, Dreaming of a New Africa, I think that we as a country without direct access to the ocean must know how to go about our lives and survival. And I cited the example of Switzerland in Europe. Switzerland is landlocked completely up in the mountains, but they, realizing their geographical position, conduct themselves as someone who knows you've got a broken foot. You don't push the way somebody with a very full, healthy foot does. And this is where the role of professionals in every field has been neglected, in my view, in our own country. Professional people in the area of relations with other countries would be all the time at the service of the government, of the leaders, ministers, so that things like claiming that we have an entitlement to a port like Dar es Salaam or Mombasa do not arise. You conduct yourself as a brother, as a friend, and those other things simply follow naturally in the spirit of brotherhood and good neighborliness. I will not forget to say what I've been thinking as we spoke. I'm not a Gen Z. I'm in my 70s. But my thinking is as fresh as your thinking. But the advantage I have is that I was in my country when another leader in Uganda talked to Kenya like that, and Kenyatta completely cut off Uganda from the port of Mombasa. Are we repeating these things? Do we care to know the history of relations between countries? Our brothers in Kenya love us. We complement each other. But they cannot allow people to say that even though we are up inside landlocked, without being the blame, the crime by Kenya, it was something created elsewhere. Kenya will not understand when we say that the port in Mombasa can be used without their own saying, let it be used. In 1977, Dar es Salaam port, Mombasa port were both cut off. Uganda wouldn't use them. Because of a leader in Uganda at that time speaking this kind of way. And I don't know, like Francis said, we need our leaders to use professionals on matters like this. Our president, Mr. Museveni, did not have to say things like those. It can be intellectual enjoyment, theorizing, but not for him as a head of state and a brother of his brother, the president of Kenya. And this is where the line of diplomacy works. I think we need to check a number of things. I know that my friends have been speaking, especially Mr. Is it Dr. Kisambira spoke about the weakness of the rule of law, the institutions. Yes, but here, again, it's professionalism. If a country ignores the value of its trained, hard-earned professionals, then we shall end up having problems. We shall end up having problems like Kenya feeling angry and saying, okay, if you want to do it by force, let's sort it out by force. And that's not what we want to have. In very much the same way my friends have been speaking about these abductions, these, imprisonments, or people moving across the border. If the community exists, you cannot have things like this happening. So we are failing to rule by standards that are established, both international and domestic. But I'm not worried. I think advisors close to our president will say, sir, we don't say those things that way. And like you said earlier on, former President Uhuru Kenyatta intervened on the quiet and secured the release and repatriation of the Kenyan young people back to Kenya. What the president has said about Uganda's leadership being entitled without any conditions accessing the port of Mombasa is a little difficult, because we know that Idi Amin said those things and Kenyatta cut Uganda off. We had no access to the port. And Nyerere, feeling that Idi Amin was behaving the way he did, he also did cut off. Now, it is in the interest of our community, and as a landlocked country, we have to adopt a certain way of living with our neighbors who happen to be with ports on the ocean. I don't want to call it Indian. That ocean is actually Mombasa and Kenya. Why did they call them an African Ocean and call it the Indian Ocean? Anyhow, that's another debate altogether. I'm just appealing as an elder. I'm privileged to be among you, speaking to you. Do not lose hope about people who are old, my age, 70 plus. Our thinking is sober, and we deploy when our age mates do things that are not correct. Don't give up. Don't think you're having to fight these old people, old women and old men. No. All East Africans, Ugandans, Kenyan, Tanzanians, and Rwandese, it's not a question of age. It's a question of being sober and future-oriented. Your generation is our interest to protect. Thank you.
This Indian Ocean access to the port saga that came up recently, and you have written an article in today's New Vision, this weekend's New Vision, and you're saying geopolitics of landlocked states see access. Guys, if you get a copy, please read about it. It's quite detailed. But now, Honorable, the EAC is currently experiencing multiple undercurrents. Kenya and Tanzania competing fiercely for regional logistics dominance. Somalia, newly admitted into the EAC, with its own Indian Ocean coast and security challenges. South Sudan destabilized, affecting pipeline plans and regional trade flows. Rwanda, Uganda, political relations still cautious. We're trading on eggshells. So this is naturally sensitive that we bring it up because Kenya is now interpreting it as a competition. Tanzania might see it as a shift away from Dar es Salaam or Tanga. We have our pipeline, the East African crude oil pipeline, going through Dar es Salaam, Tanga. Somalia views any maritime negotiation in the region through its ongoing territorial tension. So the question here for you, Honorable, and I was trying to go through your article. Are we entering a season in the East African community where we are seeing competitive nationalism disguised as a regional integration?
Oh, thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you for my colleagues who have spoken before me. On this specific issue, I think that the president is being misunderstood. And I can see a lot of hot-heated discussions going on. If you look at the tempo of discussions in Kenya, it's totally different. And they are saying the president has declared war, and this follows what his son, the city of Mohozi, declared war in Nairobi, blah, 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 blah. But I can tell you that there is no war, and war has not been declared at all. The president can be recast and repeatedly and studied for people to understand. The president did not declare any war. He simply was responding to a question, and he therefore said that as Africa, with landlocked states in the current circumstances, we're likely to see in the future. He was just announcing that if something is not done better than it is now, the likelihood that in the future landlocked countries could go to war with the coastal countries. And this is not actually news to me. As a scholar, we know very well that there's nothing cast in stone about countries' boundaries. As we speak now, there are countries being born, there are those which are being dissolved. We've had so many countries that have changed the boundaries and so on. So this is nothing like cast in stone. But the issue is that as we are, actually we are 14 landlocked countries in Africa that by virtue of demarcations by Europeans, we found ourselves others landlocked, others state countries, coastal state countries. And this definitely at one stage will have to be an issue to be sorted out with one or the other. And I want to also tell you that history has it, as I stated in my article, that about 1864, there was the second Schleswig War that saw Prussia and Austria confront Denmark. To do what? It was simply to secure access to the North Sea. And similarly, in 1914, there was also an Austro-Hungary demand to control Serbian corridors to the Adriatic Sea. And in Africa, of course, we know our countries like Ethiopia have already started demanding and even threatening to go to war because they want to be party to the geopolitics that involves the sea. So this is something realistic, and the president is not just announcing a war, he's just saying it is something that can happen unless some things change. Just look at a country's survival. For you to survive as a country, not even to talk about growth and being competitive, survive alone. When we had some clashes in Kenya, our economy was brought to its knees. That means that even militarily, if somebody wants to starve us militarily, they just have to close the border with Kenya, or even close the route to Mombasa, or even to Tanga, and we're done. The supply will not be there, won't have enough fuel to even fight back or defend ourselves. It's a matter of time that you would surrender. That kind of country cannot be said to be a serious country. A country that cannot actually survive on its own with its strategic depth being what it is, however large. For example, if Sudan was landlocked, however large as it is, it wouldn't even survive sustaining or prosecuting a war for long. And I've quoted a number of statistics where I see over 90% of our imports come through these coastal ports. And by the way, it's not just about Mombasa and Dar es Salaam. It's about access to the sea anywhere. It could be Atlantic, it could be Indian Ocean. And that's very important. And of course, I have come up with some suggestions in which I think that this could be done. And I'm happy my senior brother here has spoken about professional diplomacy and so on. Yes, but also the legalities that are in place today. What are the conventions? What are the protocols in place? What does the international law provide for this kind of thing? And I did say clearly that international law does not offer much about this. The rates given to the coastal states makes it much more stronger, and that we are the massive of the coastal states. Should it be like this forever? The answer is no. So I think first, we must have the development of strategic infrastructure corridors, which has already been suggested out there, that should be accelerated and be made bound or binding under the African Union protocols. And this should not be remain as mere trade routes, but continental security assets that are available for landlocked countries to be able to exercise some degree of sovereignty to those routes. Of course, payment of rates and all this notwithstanding. But we must have genuine shared interest where landlocked countries are granted direct equity in stakes to manage those ports. It doesn't matter. You can, as well, Kenya tell us, you put up a port in which you shall have shared responsibilities or interests and so on. To me, the second one would be, just a minute, the second one would be also creating some routes that are semi-sovereign in a way, in which the states, the hinterland states, are able to have some control over. And if they are breached, for example, it could be declaration of war. And as such, we guarantee the access to the sea, because the sea remains, because the continents as we see them today form only 1/3. The other thirds are actually water, and therefore they become the most important connections between continents, between countries. Major trading, cargo, carriage, and so on the water. That's the most important. We cannot use the plane and depend on it. So really, to me, what the president said is simple but very strategic, that there has to be some debate on this, and we must come up with a solution to it so that we don't have to go to unnecessary war in the future. And we're not taking away the ground of other countries and so on. No, but at least we should have some more anchored agreements, more guaranteed agreements that provide some degree of sovereignty by the hinterland states, so that in future we don't have to go to war. And this is what I actually wrote about in the article, and I think this is the debate. The elites should be able to do it. Can the president, is the president reckless? No, the president is not. By the way, the heads of state are granted supremacy in terms of international relations. They are the ones for whom we speak. They are the ones for whom diplomacy is engendered. They are the ones who make us what we are, diplomats. At that level of the summit, these are the owners of these territorial spaces. If the president of Russia meets the president of the US, any decision they make there is binding on their states to the extent of the laws of their countries. So I think that what the president said is not that because he's declaring war, he does not belittle to any country. He respects the sovereignty of other countries. And as I can tell you, there won't be any flick of any fear whatsoever between the leadership of Kenya and Uganda. The people who are talking in the corridors are the ones who are talking, but they're also misinterpreting the message of the president. So I don't see any trouble whatsoever that will emanate from there. Otherwise, President Ruto would have said something very terrible back, or the armed forces or something like that. So there is nothing like a threat to our neighboring countries who are the coastal area.
All right. Thank you, Honorable Simon. Let me come briefly to the chat room. And I'll begin from here. Dr. Kisambira says this matter should be handled with a lot of care. The next time Ugandan messes up in Kenya, they might go through hell with or without the law. I think in reference to the two gentlemen. The deportation of Martha Karua from Tanzania, but I think also from here, extradition of Besigye from Kenya and torture of Agatha in Tanzania, and now of Kenyans in Ugandans, all related activism raises a lot of diplomatic uncertainty in the region. Francis Kamuhada comes and says, Simon, I agree, but it should not call for rhetoric, but rather diplomatic means with transparency, accountability, and trust. And Ambassador, before I'll do a round with the rest and then come back to you. But keep this in mind. In your book, you hint on very key themes that talk about transparent governance, institutional integrity, and all these things. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what does this say about government transparency and broader issues of state accountability ahead of 2026? You think through that as I continue with Francis Kamuhada. Now, Francis, as I come to you on this particular issue, the question that comes to mind is that we are the domestic political environment right now is highly sensitive ahead of the 2026 general elections. And we are seeing that any ambiguous government deal becomes a tool for political mobilization. Social media amplifies speculation and conspiracy. It is, we are seated on a volcano that's yet to erupt, a volcanic mountain. So anything that happens will definitely be politicized. Do you think the Indian Ocean saga came at the right time? And do we need to really give it this kind of treatment? Because now everyone is scared. Kenya is scared. The entire region really is scared.
There is need to be worried and scared because, like as Simon stated, our economies or part of our survival, both economic and security, largely depends on these waters. That's why you see even the superpower countries will struggle to control the water. And again, if we go back to the United Nations Convention on law on the utilization of landlocked countries with having a legal right to access the sea, it stipulates it clearly. But however, most of these conventions by the UN, it leaves it to the individual country to ratify it. For this case, I don't think that Kenya, as far as I can remember, has not ratified that 1982 convention on the access to the sea. And therefore, it leaves a gap for bilateral agreements that it would be on us as Uganda and Kenya to agree on how we can use it. And that's where I tend to differ from what Simon and Museveni are saying in terms of, instead of seeking for a diplomatic solution, but they are pushing it to rhetoric. and just throwing statements there, which they know that the situations we are in are not just like how it was in the 1960s and so on. So that's why I say that it is very important, and it is coming strategical at a time where Uganda is heading for elections. Then next year, I think, 2027, Kenya will also be heading for polls. And this is very significant that each and every country wants to see where their leaders stand on such an issue. And it is a threat, because indeed, if Kenya takes a radical decision, of course, as Uganda would suffer. Simon saying that Dr. Ruto has not responded back, silence does not mean that either he ignores that statement or he's taking it lightly. Maybe he's consulting and thinking deeply about it and what can be done. So we should not take his silence to mean that he's okay with it. So to me, I still believe then that it is very important at this critical moment, because I said that we need to revisit our bilateral engagements, dialogue with Kenya in as far as that resource is concerned. And I would also agree with Simon that I think as the East African community, we need to have more of a long-lasting solution than being at the mercy of every leadership that comes into power. So that we know that it is clear as the East African community that this is there, regardless of who is the president of a country or who is in administration. I think that would help us and would strengthen more our position in as far as utilizing these resources concerned. But again, at the same time, we could be urging maybe Kenya to adhere to international law and also these regional cooperation agreements that we have had in place for sure. That would help us reduce on the tensions, but also at the same time bring stability in the region. Whether Kenya would close and do whatever, but they like it or not, it would also economically affect them. Because as a transit country, if we don't also conduct business with them, it will have an effect. Even, of course, like also goods pass through Uganda to Sudan and so on. In one way or another, as a bloc, would stand to lose. But having said that, it calls for our leadership to be measured in as far as the approach to such a critical issue, because I don't think that it is just called for. Ambassador said that yes, as the young people, they are there for us, and we should not castigate them. But again, we also don't want you to spoil the future that you are not part of.
Right, thank you, Francis, for that. Right now, I want to come to you, Dr. Kisambira. One, you're a doctor, but you're also a policy analyst and a student of international relations. But let's stick to policy and how that affects governance. Again, I want to hint on the current situation in the country. We are politically alert. We are sensitive ahead of 2026 general elections. Anything can be politicized. Does this incident demonstrate that Uganda needs stronger institutional checks, maybe, and balances? Because one, we have seen the two Honorable Simon and, of course, Ambassador hint on a lack of career diplomats, but also we know that we do not have a diplomacy academy. So we are in there, and this is such a huge diplomatic problem we're facing. I know Honorable Simon is saying, "Come on, you're overplaying this. You're you're using huge lenses, yet it is just something that came up. But we know it's not. So, Doctor, what say you?
Well, thank you once again. Yes, I want to first alert Simon that when it comes to diplomacy and international relations, the size of the lens that you use to view matters a lot. So it's not, everything is not just taken for granted. And that is why you as Simon would take it that, yeah, I mean, you speak it as something colloquial. The president was not meaning anything deep, and it's not war. He has not declared anything. If you want to take it as a personal attack, I would ask, why would you take it upon yourself? As who? Why would you interpret the words of the head of state? I mean, in such a manner, just to say, no, I want to say the president did not declare war. So I think there are better guys to do that job. Just like Prof said, we need serious career diplomats. They would be out there, doing all this donkey work, trying to demystify what people thought the president had meant if he was meaning something else. And I want to maybe ask two questions to the panelists. They may not require immediate answers, but just to ponder about them. So do you think some countries like maybe Rwanda and South Sudan would join Uganda if at all there was a war against those who have access to the sea and those who have not? Do you think South Sudan and Rwanda would join hands with Uganda to push this agenda? If you really think it is something to do with, there's going to be a war with landlocked countries and those that are not landlocked. And then also, why do you think the biggest percentage of people are not taking President Museveni's words for granted? It's something that raises a big question. Yes, as analysts and as people who view things with different lenses, you would actually understand that the president is simply advocating for guaranteed, kind of depoliticized and structurally secure access to the Indian Ocean for our landlocked country like Uganda. And that is how anyone else would take it if they were viewing it on a primary level. But at a diplomatic level, of course, given the tensions, political tensions that have been there between our countries, I mean, at the citizenry level, we've had vivid political tensions here and there. And for those of, you historians would call it a Cold War, and it has been eminent, especially on the social media. So, it was not the right time for the president to make such statements. And he's very aware of the international laws that govern border diplomacy and the United Nations conventions and their laws about access to the sea for the landlocked countries and how they should do that. And he's very well aware that I think that law stipulates it that there must be an agreement between the landlocked country and the transit country. What governs that access is out of the agreements that people have between their talks in, the landlocked country and the transit country. But here is the question: why now? That's the question, really. Why now that the president would make such sentiments? And also, if one would ask themselves again, what has failed the discussions? Because if you heard the president's words very well, he started by lamenting that there have been talks, but every time Kenya gets a new president, we start on a new chapter. Every time leadership changes in Kenya, we start on a new chapter. That statement is quite big. So you do not know where they stopped the other time and here. So for those of us who are still calling for diplomacy, I think for me this is kind of sort of a tip of an iceberg. And the president could be exploding in there and you never know where this is going to end, because diplomacy has been tried. Okay, they have tried it and tested it, but it has not yielded results because of the political dynamics in Kenya. But here we've had fairly what the likes of would call a stable political environment in one way or the other, where we've not had a president changing. So it is easy to have. I think Uganda has been trustworthy on that side, that it could have kept its agreements that it has made at that level of diplomatic engagements, because the president has not changed, so he will not forget what they discussed with a certain counterpart on the other side. Vis-a-vis what other countries that have had changing presidents could actually have at their side. They could have pushed a lot of things in the back door because leaders have changed. So today you could see the president speaking these words, but they could be telling you something that is boiling inside him. So I personally, for one, would not just take them for granted. Then the other thing is that it's a political season. You never know the president was making this statement as a political sentiment to win hearts of those businessmen who are doing business across Kenya, that maybe the problems that our economy is going through is because we have challenges with accessing the sea. But forgetting that there are trade-offs, he's speaking this for political gains domestically, but his international relations or bilateral relations with Kenya is at stake. For that matter, it also raises a serious issue in terms of, let's say in terms of trade-offs again, that yes, there's economic development here, but there's also potential conflict as he's trying to fight much for Uganda to have economic development. You never know, history has it that at the era of former President Idi Amin, they had clashes with former presidents of Kenya regarding the same matter. So there's potential for conflict, even when probably he's making such a statement for economic development. Not also forgetting our domestic politics versus international relations. You see, we are in a country where anyone can say anything or do anything for their local political gains, not putting in context what it would translate for them on the other scenes, for other counterparts or other players. So here, a president could be making these statements for political gains, but it is putting him at stake. Like I said, his international relations with the region has been put to a test. So in conclusion, I do not take the president's words for granted, especially when he says categorically that we might have wars in future. He is very well aware that he's not going to be here in future, and probably he has a hint on who might be here tomorrow, and he can predict their tempers on how they handle diplomatic matters. Please don't interpret my words, but I'm saying he would be knowing how the Gen Zs could handle diplomacy versus how they pursue their goals in that matter. So, his prediction for war is, don't downplay it. It is important that we set out new strategies to achieve this matter. The solution to this matter of how these countries are going to work with each other without wars. But on the side of Kenyans, they are not taking it for granted as far as I'm concerned in terms of what social media is putting out there, because they are not taking it for granted. They know that Uganda is living under military rule. So when they speak about war, it is not just a word of the street. It could be something that they mean, and also it is a question on their sovereignty as a country. They are thinking that someone is trying to play on their minds that they do not have complete control or full rights of what belongs to them. So the silence of the head of state could not just be taken still for granted. He could be down there thinking about how he's going to do it. Lastly, me and you have had it in corridors that these heads of states have helped one another to achieve their political mileages. When they are for political, when they try to take on political journeys in terms of elections and whether they'll be elected, protected, how to win votes and all that. I have heard it that our head of state has supported President William Ruto in winning an election previously. So you never know, he owes him something. You get what I mean? So when a statement comes out of the old man of the clan in the region, and you owe him something, it's not something that you're going to come out and, rebuttal there and then. You have to be very careful. You could be walking on a slippery road. So if some of you have been reading and seeing things with scrutiny, you can understand or try to roll back your minds and examine the authority with which our president has been addressing other heads of state in the region. It clearly tells you that he's the elder around, he's the boss. So when he says this ocean is mine, as a metaphor, it is very easy to interpret it on the other side that, the firstborn in the house is trying to claim the house of the father before the father dies. So, what I have to say about all this is that we need to get back on ground, set out long-standing agreements in that regard as countries. We need to strengthen the East African community. If we are serious about it, it is one big solution, one big shot to this particular problem, because by the time we achieve our aims of political integration in the region, we would have gone through all those other stages that require sharing natural resources for shared economic benefits for the region. I think that is what I have to say about this. Thank you.
All right, all right. Thank you, Dr. Kisambira. There's a lot that you hint on in there. Of course, international relations is all about how your interests play out and how you position yourself. So, well, maybe there could be a lot that you're saying and throwing our way. Kharim and Ntambi, I want to come to you and I seek your opposition lens here. We are looking at 2026 general elections, and here we are making very sweeping, statements in a very sensitive season. I know, Honorable Simon Mulongo, you have put down a lot, and we're coming to that. It's quite sensitive that we have to say all these things. The public has interpreted it differently. Simon Mulongo has said that there was some sort of miscommunication. People are misreading the president's statements. But from the opposition lens and angle, what does this moment mean for Uganda?
Lynn, is it me?
Thank you again, Lynn.
Oh, it is the... Okay, Kharim.
Thank you so much, Lynn. First of all, I would like to address a few things that Mr. Mulongo did earlier. I think you want to be careful being the the inner ego for Museveni, interpreting things for him. I mean, is the leader. I think the burden is on him to talk to the people as succinctly as possible. The message doesn't have to be to a particular kind of people to understand. He is not a prophet. So it's unfortunate that you took it upon yourself to be the interpreter of the message that everybody saw. But what does this mean? This goes back to what Francis hinted on, the lack of diplomacy and the lack of professional people in these regional matters. And Mr. Mulongo also talked about that there is need for our neighbors to give us grace and understand that if things don't go our way, maybe in future but Uganda did not give Rwanda the same grace. We closed the border, and I think in your article you missed out, although you mentioned things that happened in Europe. I think where you failed was to talk about the recent happening in our neighbor. Like, we closed the border for Rwanda for over half a year. I don't know whether you would also plead with them to go for war with Uganda so that they can break in to have access all the way to Kenya as they rightfully as in their own right, you know. So there is need for us to be careful when these messages are happening. And the reason why people are not taking this lightly actually is that the president's son for the past maybe 6-5 years, he has been doing the same. He has been trying to write provocative messages to Kenya, and Museveni has from time to time come out and apologized for what his son has been saying. So in times like this, I think the president has to be very, very, very careful, because he has to set the tone. He has to set the tone, not only as the leader of Uganda, but also as a person who has been considered an elder in the region. So I'm saying this to say that our problem is not for us as the people in the East African community, but like I said, it's the leadership. and we, the regular East Africans, are going to be the people who suffer, the victims of when all this unfolds. I'm saying this to say that there are people who have been taking advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area. People who are shipping potatoes from Kenya. Yeah, women who are doing this business. You know, people from Rwanda who are doing business in Kenya who use Uganda. You know, Ugandan women who are doing trade between, you know, Uganda and Tanzania through Kenya. So when such inflammatory messages start coming out, you put them at risk, you put their businesses at risk, and it's unfortunate that we have Mr. Mulongo here saying we are taking this as out of context at the expense of the people who have been trying to integrate, people who are doing business. I can imagine for a trader right now in Kisumu, in case things went south, they would stop and say, no, that's not what Museveni was saying. Let me call Mr. Mulongo and he explains to you what this meant. No, the message of the president has to be assist and as possible, not only to the elite, but to even us, the wananchis. We should be able to interpret the message of the president for the list. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Kharim. I'm laughing at the picture you've just painted. A trader telling, a fellow Kenyan, come on, you guys, let me call someone to interpret. No offense, Honorable Simon Mulongo, but that's really a very weird picture to paint. Now I come to you, Ambassador, and I did leave a question with you earlier, or looking at what does this say about government transparency and broader issues of state accountability ahead of 2026, but taking into account your book's warning, and allow me pick, I don't think it's verbatim, but I'll just pick what it says. Without transparent, respected institutions, even routine international engagements become a crisis of legitimacy. Ambassador.
Well, yes, thank you very much indeed. First of all, I've got gratitude to express to all the fellow panelists for the wisdom. I know that, was it Dr. Mulongo Simon, seems to have said things that the majority of these discussants are finding difficult to accept as given. The issue that is troubling is an apparent absence of laid standard codes of conduct. It doesn't have to be politics. It's just people's lives being governed by norms that are well understood. And when you know that if I do this, I'll have no problem. And that if I do this, I'll be at risk. It all boils down to that. I did say at the beginning of my personal introduction that I'm a student of political science, and for postgraduate, a student of public international law. So this discussion couldn't be more appropriate for us to speak. Technically, what our people need in East Africa, on the African continent, and more specifically domestically back in our own country, Uganda, is for people holding public offices to allow space for people, citizens who benefited from the country's resources, to learn, to study, and master things that ought to be the competence of decision making. And I think when my friends who spoke before me appealed to our leaders, the political leaders, to rely on trained citizens so that before you go to make statements, you know you're comfortable. You know this line is a red line. even heads of states of countries like the United States of America, like Britain, when a leader is going out to speak in the name of his country, he is surrounded by experts to avoid problems of interpretation and misinterpretation. So my brother Mulongo Simon, what you come out as is somebody who is very well read, very well knowledged, but you're not insisting on the application of that knowledge. You talk about infrastructures, maybe there being a road that should be of obvious access to countries that are landlocked, but you're talking about building that road on Kenyan territory. You wouldn't build a road that didn't fall under the country through which it goes. So it presupposes that there would be facilities on the African continent, not even suspended like flyovers over the territory, because in international public law, there is the law of the air, there is the law of the land, and there is the law of the sea. And these things are prescribed territorially. So I'm saying that you have a lot of knowledge, sir, and I feel you're right, but you must help. If you have the chance to speak to our president, to speak to him constructively, so that you don't have to come and begin interpreting for him. You speak to the president prior to his going to make the pronouncement. Because in communication, don't blame the one who hears. Check what you and how you said what you said. What is happening now is questions arising after our president has gone and said things. And you're saying the Kenyans do not have to worry. It wasn't really meant to be a declaration of war. You're saying that there is a sentiment among some Kenyan circles that maybe the Ugandan leader of state, head of state, threatens to apply force to get his way through to the port. These are not the intentions of the president, and I imagine they cannot be. We have very recent record when a Ugandan head of state, Idi Amin, made similar statements, and actually Kenyatta closed the port to Uganda. So it's not serious to say that, no, they don't have to worry. We now have to repair and speak. I said we don't have to worry because basically Kenyans, Ugandans, and Tanzanians live in good faith as brothers. And I belong to the age bracket of our president, where we are supposed to be mature. And although my good friend Kisambira said, no, we worry about our future where you may not be after you've left us. No, a good father, a good grandfather cares a lot about what the generation following will be living in. This is an impression, unfortunately, some of our elders in positions of responsibility have caused the youth to feel, that we don't seem to care about tomorrow. No. For one, I care a lot. And this is why I offered we should engage in this discussion. We must be knowledge-based, and I thank every member of this panel to be sounding like people who are knowledgeable, and our concerns, our worries, our anxieties are knowledge-based. And as you say in my book, I appeal to all our countrymen and countrywomen to respect professional training in whichever field it may be, and to have ethics in doing our jobs. I confessed I was at one point part of our own country's civil service, And through very challenging times. When I finished McKinley, the man in power was Idi Amin. But we had a law that when you finish your studies, you must put yourself at the disposition of the country for 5 years first. So we had to join the public service. And we served through right up to the present regime. And my conviction is when you speak to the president, when you brief him, when you advise him, be honest to him and to the country. And when you save the president's face, you're saving the country's face. And I think why Dr. Sarongo Simon, some of the youth, your fellow youths, are sort of not satisfied, is that you're saying, instead of having spoken to our head of state in advance, you're coming and saying, no, you don't have to worry, and let me give you what he was meaning. That comes after the harm has happened. So I think when you said, what is my reading of this? The place of rules, of the rule of law, of norms, professionalism must be embraced if we are going to survive, even within the East African community. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Going to the chat rooms, Francis says Sudan and Rwanda would not join Uganda in the ocean war. They would rather help in the speedy collapse of Uganda. Oh, well, that was a response to Dr. Kisambira. The statement, and he says, Dr. Kisambira says, the statement, whatever tone it is, it bullies Kenya's sovereignty. All right. Now I come to you, Honorable Simon Mulongo. I hope you did not take any blows and they did not injure you, because a lot has been sent your way. But let's quickly look at what has been said, and I'm sure you have some recaps there, rather some reactions to what has been said. Honorable.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I was listening quite intently to what colleagues were saying, and definitely I have a response. One is that there is a mix-up of facts. For example, when you say, what authority do you have to interpret for the president? Well, why should you speak for him? But it is our role as the intelligentsia to do that. And they're doing exactly that. They are reading either between lines or over the lines or under the lines and messaging what they believe the president meant. So just the same way you do, I do as well. But additionally, I was in Bali with the president when he made this statement, and this came out of the questions from the media houses. And this follows a number of engagements between Uganda and Kenya over time and different instances between regimes. And so the president was sort of venting frustration, but also speaking strategically about the geopolitics of landlocked states vis-a-vis the coastal states. And in my view, the fact is that leaders of the level of the president world over, they actually have the right to provide strategic direction. But the operational communication is supposed to be shaped by the diplomats and technocrats. They're the ones who interpret and, provide the basis for which such a message is supposed to be and what it means, and engage, of course, across the spheres with their counterparts, either neighbors or even globally. And of course, my senior colleague, the diplomat, I'm also quite a student of diplomacy, and I've had a stint at diplomacy myself. And also having worked with the President Museveni quite closely, I can have a degree of understanding of, not entirely, but somehow where I think I can dress this message to be like. And I want to say that to me, President's remarks are not necessarily reckless diplomacy. and we can actually put it in a strategic context, because this is an issue that's a living issue. We have Ethiopia that have issued threats to some neighbors, and the threat is likely to be put into action sooner or later. And there have been mobilization of the war machinery in Ethiopia, and so on. And I've given you the historical stint of what has happened before in the world. And I told you that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, particularly, I think Part 10, if I'm not wrong, acknowledges that landlocked nations face systemic vulnerabilities about access to the sea. And of course, they affirm the right of access, and then the obligation of transit states to facilitate movement, blah, 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 blah. So, but President Museveni recognizes that. But he says there are deficiencies regarding these provisions, and therefore there is need to anchor it. He didn't go into details of what he thinks should be done, but he was just saying, should the circumstances not change in a manner? For example, the 8 states that are landlocked in Africa could easily go to war one time in the future. He did not declare war. He did not. And if anybody wants to interpret the message wrongly, it is our responsibility to say, no, hey, this is not what it meant. Because if you want to declare war, President Museveni is a soldier as well. He knows how to declare war. He could say it. But he did not say that. He said actually what? Future. What about the security doctrine that he was under, which was grounding his argument? That's very serious. Actually, if a country cannot sustain its security because of its vulnerability related to access to the sea, for example, that's a serious issue which must be addressed. And that's why most of these nations out there that had the liberty of forging nationhood, they had access to the sea, except for a few countries like Austria that are locked up high in the mountains in the hinterland. So I think that, and then the issue of closing the border. Let's get facts right. It is Rwanda who closed the border. It wasn't Uganda. It was unilaterally closed by Rwanda. Tom, Dick, and Harry knows this. I just wonder why we could not get this right. But I want to say the statement of President Museveni totally differs from that of Idi Amin. Idi Amin declared war. He gave ultimatum. He said the border should be shifted to Naivasha, as it were, by 1890s, and that without which was going to actually attack Kenya to enforce the threat. These are totally different things, and we cannot compare the two. And so to me, we need, as diplomats, as scholars, as the intelligentsia, to see how to situate legally, constitutionally, and operationally what this means. Because we need to see the essence. What is the quantity of the worries of the president? And he's not just speaking as Uganda, he's representing landlocked countries. Does it have any quantity? Are there any case in history that we can cite of? And what do we therefore prefer as educated people, as landed people, to say, where is it practically possible for us to find a solution to this kind of problems? Because it is a reality. So to me, I think I would like to appreciate colleagues because their contributions are really eye-opening, and I'm not just pretending. And I was in the room, and I've worked with the president for a while. I may not understand him fully, but definitely have some iota of understanding. And I knew the operational environment around which he responded to that question. So definitely I can speak a little more authoritatively as to what the president could have meant, because I had a background which was not brought out by the media houses. So yes, there we go. As the intelligentsia, we are vanguards of interpretations. My professor here, the author and diplomat, in his book, which I have not read, I believe he quotes sources and puts value onto those sources. That's interpretation. And even some of us who are saying what we think it is and not what it is on my side are also interpreting the situation. So it is our right to resize, assess, and come and proffer what we think the essence of such a message is. And then it is also the responsibility to manage the consequences if they're negative, to tone them down. Because definitely, yes, President Ruto will say something, but even before he says it, maybe they're even talking between the two of them and so on, because he never meant to declare war on Kenya as such, because he has not declared war on Kenya. I'll leave it at that, Lynn, but thanks so much. I think this is very important. I'm sure this topic is going to go on for a while, and
Yes,
I hope we shall be able to. I'm writing quite some long article on it, academical as well, and I hope it will be peer reviewed so that I publish it to make my arguments and what I think, what the president says, to problematize it, and therefore what solution we think should be accorded to it. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Simon. Francis Kamuhada, as we're concluding on this conversation, we are seeing that our ambitions are shifting, of course. I mean, Honorable Simon Mulongo says the president might have been misinterpreted, but, well, this conversation really shows what the future might look like. We are geopolitically, putting our ambitions out there and saying maybe we also want to, put our growing interest in military and security cooperation, to project our regional influence. So conclusively, Francis Kamuhada, what say you on the way forward?
Thank you, Lynn. As earlier said, I am vehemently opposed to the rhetoric that the president used. That was uncalled for, and it is wrong, and it does not speak for all Ugandans. That's why I'm here to say I'm not part of that rhetoric. Then number two, as I said, that we should be routing to more of diplomatic and bilateral engagements and solutions with the concerned countries like Kenya, given that we already have one of the aspirations that we share in common, which is the East African community. It is important for all these leaders to go and revisit what is the purpose of the East African community and where are we heading, than inviting unnecessary trouble for each politician to score their political goals in their respective countries and to entrench themselves into whatever they are trying to do, but to think of a greater picture. And that then brings me back, therefore, to the attention of Mulongo, that now, Mulongo, you see that was even a mistake to go on expanding the East African community, invite Somalia and so on, before even sorting out such, because we are adding more confusion into the mix. So I would say that it is important as East African community, we should continue pursuing diplomatic means and good channels, but also governments should invest much in ensuring that they go back to what we call career, well-trained and career diplomats, for us to be able to march into this rapid changing world, but also to suit into the global village as players. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. And on that note, I am calling for a diplomatic academy. We need one in the country, one that trains these people into better diplomats. In the chat room, Dr. Sambe is saying, Dear Mulongo, I think it's an obligation. I think he will clarify on that when I come to him. Francis Kamuhada says, Simon, Ethiopia and other countries threatening and going to war with their neighbors does not guarantee recklessness for Uganda to emulate, unless you want to suggest that Uganda will have no standard of diplomacy, but instead cut and paste, something I'm vehemently opposed to. And he has hinted heavily on that he's heavily opposed to feet. Kharim and Ntambi, Dr. Kisambira, I come to you. Please clarify on what you posted in the chat room, but also conclusively as we move forward, as we, of course, learn more about what the president maybe was trying to communicate. Are we looking at deeper governance challenges in Uganda in your concluding remarks?
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, panelists. I was simply, as Mulongo said, it's a right for the heads of states to give strategic direction, but I think it's an obligation. It's not a right to do so. I think it's just an obligation that they have to fulfill. Well, I don't have much to conclude with because I think in my submissions are so exhaustive. I think I want to just emphasize the fact that we need to push harder for the East African community and economic cooperation. Those two goals should be achieved if you want to reduce the tensions between member states, because we have a lot to work on in different regards, from problems of geographical jurisdiction to rule of law to political environments and many other things. So we need to push for this integration if we are really meaning it. And as a region or a regional bloc, we shall reap much in that. And then we need to also hasten our fasten our belts, actually, when it comes to disputes. Really, as a region, it looks like the future is more disputeful than the past or even the present. So we need to refine our dispute resolution mechanisms and how we choose to go about our problems. But if it's going to be a tit for tat, I don't think as a region we will have to go really far. Maybe my last take on this is about our regional blocks and how we choose, international, alliances and how we choose them. So I think one of the efforts that we can leverage on is how we make choices of our international allies. It would raise our negotiation powers when it comes to such matters of pushing our interests, as Uganda, both in the regional area, but also on the global stage. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kisambira. And finally, Kharim and Ntambi, as we call it a day here on this conversation, from the opposition angle again, I ask, with this coming now, what then should we be focusing on? Because everybody sort of, the effect it has had on people as in this political season is quite deep. It's everyone is talking about it. Everyone is saying, why now? But as the opposition moving forward, what do you say?
Thank you again. As I conclude, I think there has been should I call it an opposition fatigue from our leaders in East Africa. They are really fatigued looking at opposition collaborating in the region, and I think that keeps them very uncomfortable. Looking at young people in Uganda and in Tanzania and in Uganda working, together to see that they change the circumstances under which they are living right now. So as future governments, I think what I would urge my comrades in Kenya and Tanzania is to seek out the best out of the East African community. What should we strengthen? There are things that we can really work on. I'll give an example. The East African railways is something that is big, that can be very beneficial as a project if we embarked on extending it beyond Kenya and Tanzania to DRC, to Somalia and South Sudan. That would be something really big for business. Not only just business coming in from the border, but also the interregional trade. It would be something that would benefit us. And also, I think as the East African community, there is need for us to to have common ground, like not just on paper, and on things like human rights and good governance. Because what happens is, most of the times you see our leaders say, "Oh, we have the strength in the East African region. We are a bloc of these countries that have come together for economic, political, and social development," until one of them is being called out on what their evils are, and then they are going to assert their sovereignty. Oh, we are a sovereign country. Yeah, I thought, yes, you might be sovereign, but you signed up to be part of, you signed up to be part of this East African community. So if we say that this should be the standards for human rights, or the standards for good governance, I think all of us as East Africans should be able to adhere to that, other than waiting for the time when you're being called out and you're being assertive of how much you want your state to be. You don't want any foreign intervention. You don't want, no, because you have given us as a people the language to move with, the language as East Africans, that we are our brothers keepers. So that's why you've been seeing activists in Uganda move to Tanzania when there is trouble. You've been seeing activists cross border from Kenya to Uganda, because we believe as a people that we have become one. And until these leaders who don't believe in what they are establishing are out of power, I think we will have time to enjoy that in the years to come. Thank you so much, Lynn.
All right, thank you, Kharim. I feel a little bit. I think I should ask the ambassador to give us conclusive remarks in a minute, ambassador, and then we can call it a show.
Thank you very much indeed again for leading this conversation. First and foremost, at school, I had some ex-servicemen of the Second World War. They were British. And they gave me one little saying that I always remember in my daily life, that a chain is as strong as its weakest link. Now, the East African community is now many countries, getting to about 6, 7. But this collection of entities, if each in its own way at home does not live by the rule of law, the community is not going to be happy, because each individual state, by respecting the requirements, the exigencies of the rule of law, then it's possible to enjoy movement of people, goods, and everything. And I think that this poses a challenge to our own country as Uganda, basically a very important country where the first university was, at the time we went to university in Makerere, was the East African University. And today we have the most senior head of state, and his behavior is going to be emulated by the younger leaders. So it's incumbent on our own people, Ugandans, to set the standard of excellence, not of being obnoxious. Because if we are obnoxious, others are going to emulate it. And that's not the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Indeed, Francis says, Ambassador, thank you for being part of safeguarding the future of the young generation to the continuity and stability of the global society. You're right. Thank you, gentlemen, for making time, and we'll hope when we call upon you next time to also join us when other conversations arise. I wish to wish you a very wonderful weekend.